I'm joined by some fantastic speakers. You can see them in your agenda. First, I'm Kyle Belakopitz, the Executive Director of the New York State Parent-Teacher Association. So proud to be here today with you. Joined by me from right to left is Assemblywoman Nily Rozic. Assemblywoman, thank you so much for being here. Next, we have to her left, Randi Weingarten, my dear friend who is president of the AFT. Randi, thanks for being here from DC. Randi is all over the place. To her left, we have Dr. He told me how to, no, I'm Belakopitsky, so I should not do well with this last name. Dr. Kaczorowski, how did I do? He is the chair of the American Association of Pediatrics, because we know a relationship between our pediatricians and parents are so critical. Thank you, Jeff, and he said to call him Jeff. Jeff, thank you for being here today. To his left, we have Dr. Nick Harris. Nick, thanks for being here today. He is a school psychologist, so critical, a part of that school mental health team from Guilderland Central Schools, and the secretary of the New York State Association of School Psychologists. And to my right is my friend, Dr. Oliver Robinson, a former New York State Superintendent of the Year and Superintendent of our largest school district here in the Capital Region, Shenendehowa. We are going to jump right into questions. First, I want to say this is a critical panel. In a quick survey of the audience, how many of us have a school-age child? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Okay, look around the room. How many of us are a school-age child? Raise your hands, right? And those are the most important people here, so let's give them a round of applause. So school-age children, keep your hands up. Parents and families of school-age children, keep your hands up. How many of you teach a school-age child? Raise your hand. Or an educator of a school-age. And how many of us know a school-age child? Right? Okay, everybody's hand should be up. How many of us think that cell phone usage is a problem for our school-age children? Okay, how many of us think cell phone usage is a problem for adults? Right? Because I have to be honest, we model poor behavior for our children. I know I model poor behavior for my son. It's a constant conversation in my home, and he calls me out on it like any 15-year-old does all the time. So that's going to be a continuing conversation today. We know what the experts say, we know what science says, and we know what common sense says. We know that there is more than a correlation related to mental health challenges of our students and children and cell phone usage and social media. That's what we're going to talk about today. Excessive cell phone usage and social media is impacting student development. It is impacting learning in the classroom. I know my educators here, I know my medical professions here will tell you the same thing. Devices are altering what's happening in our classrooms daily. They are reducing academic achievement. They are reducing social interactions amongst our students, and we're going to kind of dig into that. So a quick question for all of you, and we're going to kind of keep answers short on this question. And I'm here to tell you, if you are a parent of a child in middle or high school and you think your child is not on social media, you are gravely mistaken. They are. They hide it from you. If you tell them you shouldn't be on it, they are hiding it from you at their friend's house. My son hid it from me before he had it. That is common amongst children. I love children so much, and they sometimes are devious when they want to do things that we were devious to our parents. So go home, and I guess this is your first homework assignment. Have that conversation with your parent, with your children around the table about safe social media usage. Have that conversation about cell phone usage with your child. They are on social media, even if you think they are not. Educators, have this conversation in your school buildings, in your classrooms about safe social media. It is critical. So let's jump right in. In what ways do you think that social media is really affecting student development? Jeff, I'm going to start with you.
I think there are really four ways. The first is distraction. The second is mental health. The third is safety, both physical safety in the sense of bullying or being attacked, but also the psychological safety that goes along with trauma. And the last one is one that we don't talk enough about, but Christopher in the last panel started to allude to. It's loneliness, which is really striking, right? Remember the old Bruce Springsteen song, 57 channels and nothing on?
I think none of the children in the audience know that song, Jeff.
Do they know who
we
Bruce
all do.
Springsteen is?
We're dating our age. We're dating.
Bruce Springsteen, 57 channels and nothing on was an allusion to cable television and all these new channels. And today it's kind of like constantly interacting but never communicating. And loneliness is such a key factor driving all of those things. The Surgeon General has a report that says about 50% of adults feel lonely every week. And if you look at young children, children high school and middle school age, that number goes up to almost 2/3. How is that possible when we are all always interacting on our phones?
Yeah, and Jeff,
Thanks.
I agree. And Nick, I know you are seeing children and youth every day in Guilderland. I'm a proud Guilderland graduate. My 31-year-old son graduated from Guilderland a long time ago. So tell me what that looks like in a school building, and what are you seeing with this same question? How do you see this affecting your students and their development in Guilderland?
Honestly, it has a lot to do with their social emotional development. The struggling to talk to students, talk to adults, problem solve, how to navigate social situations, how to look people in the eye, or whatever the preference is when speaking with them, and just coping with the world around them. They hide their feelings, they hide their comments in the social media worlds, and then most of the time our students are reporting that, whatever site they're on, whatever they're doing, they feel more depressed, more anxious, and more distracted just because of them. So we get a lot of referrals to counseling centers, social work office, psychologists, to help navigate those things, because most of the time they're just trying to escape them.
And Randy, I know you've been traveling around the country on this issue for a long time, a long-time educator and teacher in the classroom in New York City. What are you hearing around the country? This cannot be just a New York issue.
Yeah. Sorry.
It takes a minute. Hold on, take Jeff's rant.
I'll use my educator voice until I get a better microphone, okay? Is it working now? No.
Jeff, you want to hand Randy your mic?
Thank you,
There we go.
Jeff. Okay, it's working now.
Yes.
So, look, there's always about a binary choice here that we need to reject, which is what I think the first panel was saying. There's a lot of things that the internet has done that's been very helpful, but overwhelmingly, right now, post-COVID, particularly with the onset of AI and with the lack of regulation in the social media space, the disruption to relationships, coping, problem solving, and what both parents and educators need to do for kids, which is how we prepare them to navigate their world. This is a hugely, not just disruptive, but it is a hugely problematic source of undermining that. And you see that across the country now. And so I would say we got involved and engaged with working on COPA and COPPA and putting out this report that a lot of you see on the tables. I'll talk about that more later. But we got involved because what we saw post-COVID is what both the doctor and the educators here are saying. Kids were not looking at each other. They're not even not talking to each other. They weren't looking at each other. They didn't have the vocabulary. They were fixated and addicted to the phone. And so that's why we really got involved and engaged and wanted to try to correct the mistakes that had been made in terms of the onset of social media, of not having any liability or accountability or responsibility with the social media companies.
And that's a great segue to Oliver, and with real responsibility in social media companies. Oliver, and you're going to know off the top of my head, you have thousands of students in Shenendehowa. You are very vocal on this issue, and you took a step that many school districts have not taken yet and actually sued social media companies. So let's talk a little bit about that. What does that look like? You took legal action on behalf of your students. Explain what that looks like, explain what's happening with that, and explain why you felt so strongly about that as a school leader and a state school leader. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, okay, a few things. When you think about the issue and the topic we're talking about, there are different levels and types of responsibility. Their responsibility on parents, responsibility on students, their responsibility on school personnel. And in this case, we're talking about the responsibility that tech companies must have and take ownership of. And we've heard a lot of it before. And so when you think about several years ago, the largest issue schools, and to a large degree still dealing with, surround Juul, e-cigarettes. And so as a part of our responsibility as a school in terms of creating the environment for students to learn, we participated in a lawsuit for that, to say we have to do something about the addictive nature of e-cigarettes that's quite frank, which are not only, it's literally killing our kids in many ways, but certainly a major, major issue within schools. And so that then triggered a notion then, what responsibility do we have as school communities when parents, in fact, do send their students to us with blind faith that we're going to have their best interest in mind, knowing that there's certain factors that many of them which we cannot control outside of it. However, how can we use our platform as a school community to try to influence what tech companies do? You've heard a lot of things before in terms of the deceptive practices, the recently trying to look at age restrictions. So from our vantage point is, I'm not sure, quite frankly, the suit is still ongoing. I'm not sure from a financial standpoint what will be the implication of it. It was much more so from the message standpoint that we are seeing the end results of what's happening from a, quite frankly, purely economic market space from companies who are creating platforms and the implications happening within our schools. And so it is part of our responsibility to, again, create that environment. So we're coming at it from that standpoint of upholding our responsibility as a school system to ensure that how students come to school, recognizing that in order for a student to learn, they must, in fact, be psychologically available to learn. And so that's the impetus for the lawsuit that we're engaged in right now. We started this back in August of 23, and it's still going. It's a nationwide lawsuit, and we'll see what happens with it. If nothing else, and quite frankly, I think a lot of the changes that you see now happening with tech companies is a result of some of these suits that's popping up, sending the message that, you know what, we all have a responsibility for the best interests of our students.
And I agree, and I really want to thank my colleagues that are here from our other sister associations, the Principals Association, SANES, the School Boards Association, NISCUS, the Superintendents Association, the Conference of Big Fives, the ECB. This is really a critical issue for all of the associations. Certainly nicer at putting on this conference, Randi, of course, AFT and NEA, for all the work that they do. And certainly the Assembly and Senate and the Governor have been partners in this work. Assemblywoman Rozic, I know you and I have worked on this issue along with our education stakeholders, and certainly Melinda. We were all at that press conference in October that the governor was talking about. You have been such a tireless advocate. Your bill was fantastic. You and Senator Gianardis really led the charge in Albany on this issue. Tell us a little bit about what happened this last session, and let's give her, yes, an applaud for the Assemblywoman. And also our education chairs, and this ended up really being a bipartisan support and legislative package that really supported kids. Let's talk about that.
So as a policymaker, as a legislator, you often get tasked with tackling these big picture, broad stroke issues. This was the first time in my entire career, really, and I've been doing this 11 years now, that you really felt the issues at home, and you heard real examples and real stories that brought the policy to life. This has real impact. And to what one of the other panelists was saying, social media companies are not going to do this on their own. Cell phone companies are not going to do this on their own. So we, through lawsuits or national legislation, but certainly at the state level, have to push for policies that actually impacts our kids, because they're not going to move without that. Instagram is not going to create these teen accounts without legislation, first in the nation in New York passing, and then being replicated in other states. They're not going to do that on their own. So that was a real big push. I think, going back to your first question, if I can, the really big aha moment for me was when Melinda and I were at a press conference with announcing the legislation in Albany, and one of the teachers got up and said, I have students who come to class and they have just been up all night doom scrolling. They are exhausted. And that for me really brought it home, right? This is not just happening in one place, one random school district. This is an epidemic. This is happening across all classrooms, and we really have to put an end to it.
And I think that's why advocacy is so important. And I think Mary is still here. And Mary, your story was so powerful. And being the advocate that I am, something that you said to me, kind of said, oh, I need to follow up with that. So I was actually at the Instagram and Meta announcement in New York City with other colleagues from PTA. So, and when you said, oh, this was only going to be new accounts, I said, well, I'm going to check on that. So I texted National PTA and Meta and said, I need an answer on this right now. Is this for new teen accounts? So I'm going to, I don't know where you are, Mary, but I did get an answer from Instagram, and I'm going to read you the answer, and I'm going to follow up with you personally and with Instagram to make sure this is the case. So this is what Instagram just sent me, one of their senior leaders. Immediately, we started placing teens who sign up for Instagram into teen accounts, and we are in the process of notifying teens using Instagram now about the changes so we can begin moving them into teen accounts next week. Our plan is, as PTA asked, because we've been asking a lot of the social media companies for work on this for a while, is to place all teens into teen accounts within the next 60 days in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. And then our next step, we will start placing teens from Europe into teen accounts later this year. Mary, I'm going to personally follow up with you on this to make sure that isn't the case in 60 days from Instagram. But I think it's advocacy like that we have to continue to hold, Nily, as you have social media companies accountable. And this is the work that we did. So when we were in New York City at Meta offices, having these conversations with Meta and Facebook and TikTok like PTA and AFT and NICET does and other associations do, it's that accountability and the constant communication on these issues that is this two-way communication. So we will follow up with Instagram and make sure that happens in 60 days. Mary, I don't know where you are. Your story made me text Instagram. And I am gonna listen, sister. I am a mom, and I will call you, and I will make sure that happens. Okay, okay. Yeah, Randi. Actually, I'm gonna go to you next. So, quick question for you, because you're really on the national scene of us all. Tell us what's happening on the national scene for legislation and DC. What does that look like? Because this is not a New York issue. I mean, obviously, a lot of these social media companies are cited in New York City or in California, but what do we look like nationwide?
Well, that's why, first off, Mary and her colleagues being in Washington yesterday was hugely impactful. And I think that Senator Schumer being in Syracuse a few days ago, and Melinda was at that press conference, and Mary was as well, kind of goading the Republicans in the House of Representatives to make sure they push COPA and COPPA was really, really important. And I just want to say that all that advocacy, I raise these things because a lot of this happens in silence. People don't see it. All that advocacy is really, really important. So there's two things that are going on nationally right now. There's actually one thing, but it's two bills, COPA and COPPA. And they're essentially, and Mary talked about it a little bit, they essentially do two things. What COSA does is COSA basically creates a duty of care, which the tech companies do not want. I mean, it does a lot of other things. Your bill was fantastic because it took on the algorithm, but COSA creates a duty of care. The current law, in terms of social media law, basically says that these social media companies are indemnified from any of the issues that happen. And they do it through saying that the social media companies are speech companies as opposed to products liability issues. And that's what the lawsuits are doing as well. So that's what COSA does. It creates a duty of care. Mary's going to check me if I'm wrong on this. It's many, many pages, but that's what it does. I'm sorry, that's what COSA does. What COPPA does is COPPA basically is updating the current law on privacy. And this is the most important fact that I can give you, if I can find it, which is that by the time a child is 13 right now, the tech companies have captured more than 72 million pieces of personal data, and they use it to target ads and amplify harmful content, things like that. What this does is basically says you have to have permission before you can use any of this material. That's why these two bills are really, really important, and the Senate passed both of them by about 93 to whatever. I'm sure it wasn't 93
I heard we
to
have
7.
3 we have to work on, so
Yeah,
it's gonna be.
but what I would just say, in addition, is that the stories that people are telling are really important. And what we did last year in terms of AFT land, as I call it, is we put out this report that says likes versus learning. We did it with the American Psychological Association, we did it with Fair Play, we did it with a lot of other groups, because what we need to do is make sure that these tech companies can't keep using their terms of art as opposed to our terms. Like, we need to understand what the algorithm is. We need to understand what automatic scroll means. We need to understand the impact, and that's why we tried to put this report out in plain English. And the last thing I'll say is this. I gave this report to Mark Zuckerberg. We tried to create, when we put it out, we tried to create meetings, we tried to do things. We took our pension funds and went to their meetings and said, we're going to vote against you if you don't change these things. That's why new law is so important. I put it in his hand because I saw him in Washington, and he refused to have a meeting with us. He stood up at a hearing, turned around to parents and said he apologized. But the only reason Instagram and he is doing anything is because of all of you and because of COPPA and COSA. That's why we need these 2 bills, and we need the House to actually vote on it. I agree with Mary, they weakened it, but we are all focused on the Senate version of it and to get it out and to get it in law either now or during the lame duck after the election, because this will make real change for these social media companies and create real accountability.
Agree. Nily, do you have thoughts on that?
Just add to what Randi said is that before COSA and COPPA, if they ever pass, the actual federal law has not changed since I was 12 years old. Okay, so it's very, very clear that the landscape has drastically changed, and it is almost impossible for us to keep up with that. I actually have to run. I have a hearing on AI and protections that we need to be insisting on and regulating for our students and consumers, because that's the next step. But again, the federal law has not changed since the late 1990s, early 2000s. So that's why we really pushed for a state level law to kind of get ahead. But really, there's a lot more work to do. So we really need everyone to lean in and tell your stories and tell friends in other states as well, because this is a huge movement and a huge undertaking just to keep up with what we're at now. I can't even imagine what the landscape will be like in a year or 2.
Yeah, agree. And if you want to take action on COPA and COSA at this conference, and I will turn to Melinda too to talk about where their action items are, you can go to the NYSPTA website and then go to advocacy and then go to take action. The third item there is an item where you can email your members of Congress on both COPA and COSA, so please do that while you're here. And I know a member of NYSET will share where their action item is on that. But so before you leave, go to nyspta.org, go to advocacy, go to take action, and you can email your legislators on both COPA and COSA. You will get an email back from them. It will probably be a form email, but know that the more times we contact them on these critical issues, that the better. Oliver, you have a lot of students, and I know that you have been a long stalwart for, working on anti-bullying initiatives and supporting students. Back in our day, we'll date ourselves, I didn't have a cell phone. We had pagers. And bullying stopped at the school door. When you got off the bus, you were home in a safe space. And if you were being bullied, it ended at school. And now, as we know, bullying is really happening throughout the entire afternoon and evening hours online, as we've heard in the previous panel. What does that look like in your school building now that bullying really has gone digital? And how are school districts responding to that? And Nick and Jeff, I want you to think about that too.
Well, a couple of things. Before I address your specific question, Kyle, I just want to something on the other side of what Randi just mentioned. So, and also I appreciate the sentiment at the end. legislation is slow to happen. And that's the reality, right? And so let's approach it from the other side. There's an old adage, money talk, the other stuff walk. And the bottom line is from
job.
the
There's children in the
yes,
audience,
exactly,
Oliver.
children in the audience, right? From the reason why I want to emphasize that point is that change happens when there's a financial implication to it. And so subsequently, again, the lawsuit side is basically saying that there could be significant financial implications if we don't get things like age verification, if we don't get things like more parental controls, if we don't stop the targeted algorithm. And so again, it's not about saying what's happening, it's about demanding what you want. And I think that even our legislation needs to make sure we're not talking about the problem, but demanding a certain solution. And so with that being said, we see it now. We see that most of the issues are, again, I don't necessarily want to quantify, a lot of the issues we see with students in school, it is issues that stem from social media, harassment, conversations, this artificial notion of who's my friend and who's not my friend, and those type things. And so a big part of that then is how do we use those opportunities as learning opportunities for our students even. And we have here at Shen, I'm pleased that we have 2 tables. When I walked in, somebody said at the Shen table. I'm like, that's a beautiful thing. And many of our counselors and teachers here. And so I think a big part of that is also as adults, how do we try to put our heads in the space of kids who are, quite frank with you, not developed cognitive or otherwise, we have our experts here who could speak to that, to contend with some of the things that they're contending with in a virtual space, right? Before, kids used to have little knockdown, dragouts in parks and playground, and you kind of go to each other's house and talk it over and resolve. But nowadays, you have a knockdown, dragout with people who you have never met. And so that's a whole different set of circumstances. And so I think that's the challenge in terms of, again, the training that we have to have as educators, as counselors within our schools, and also the conversation we need to have with parents in terms of what conversation they have with their children. Because oftentimes we place the blame on kids, and I'm not saying that kids are not necessarily a part of the responsibility. However, in many cases, they don't even have the skill set to even ascertain, understand what's happening to them, and that's why we have some of the unfortunate crisis situation, much less what I call the everyday run-of-the-mill harassment, bullying things that we deal with in our schools. And so it's a complex set of circumstances that we're trying to address and not have it be so complicated to get to resolutions.
I agree. And Jeff and Nick, what are your thoughts with working with students on this on a daily basis? We know the Surgeon General has warned about the issues of social media. We know there's research out there. When does the social media and cell phone really start affecting students, and what does that look like from a bullying perspective?
Early. That's the best answer I got in terms of when it starts. My own children are in 2nd and 4th grade, and the principal in our 4th grade building has had to put out issues dealing with students and cell phone use and cyberbullying and choreographing when other students were going to beat up another student through messaging systems and social media in school. This is 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade building. We talk about access to education, things happening outside of school that impact their ability to be present and learn in school. But it also has an effect called cognitive blunting, our ability to take in and actually developmentally be prepared to engage and learn and evolve into these healthy adults that we want them to be. So this is just ever-present. It's stuff that our administrators deal with, so bless you all that are administrators, including our district office staff. And it's ever-changing, and we got to keep changing with it because we see more and more issues dealing with it, and we see an increase in diagnoses because of it.
Jeff, thoughts?
Yeah, I think going back to talking about always interacting and not communicating, this is a fundamental lack of human interaction, right? This is what happens when we don't spend time with each other personally, Christopher, and listen to each other and understand tone and look each other in the eye, right? And it requires, the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, where I work, is dedicated to the health of all children. And in New York, we are an advocacy organization, and we advocated for this legislation. And you know what? New York is leading the whole country because of you guys. Really. This legislation, and my colleague Lauren Tobias is in back and works with me on this, but really, the Academy of Pediatrics is a national organization, and they are, the national organization is huge, and they're so envious of what happened here in New York. And I want to say to Mary, you and Riley are going to win. We're going to win. But I also want to say, to your point and to Randy's point, these are not good guys. These are not good guys. I mean, if you look at the press announcements the last couple of days, they're using the exact language that the tobacco companies used, right? When you're grown up, you can have access to these things. What does every kid want to be? This is deliberate. These are not good guys, right? Randy is exactly right. And watch the next series of announcements. They will mimic exactly what the tobacco companies did in terms of their messaging. And they will communicate with kids and make it sound like they're doing really good stuff and make the kids feel like they're being left behind and they're being treated as children who don't have a voice. They're so good at it. So, all of which is to say, thank you so much for our work together to have this legislation in New York, and we need more legislation and policy making because we have to get back to more human interaction.
Agree. And Randy, do you have some final thoughts for us?
No, it's working. It was a laugh. The last panel of today on really learning and about media literacy that NICE have put together. You think this panel and the panel that's about to happen on cell phones is the most important. I would argue that that last panel is the most important panel of today because part of what's going on is that the language that these tech companies use are both seductive and also competitive and in the way in which tobacco companies use, but it's not just the language. They have all the tools right now. Think about right now, whether you like or dislike Elon Musk. This is the power of the algorithm. He is in control of the algorithm. So everyone who is on Twitter will see every one of his posts anytime he puts it up there. It's not going to be taken down. You're going to see it. That's the power of the algorithm. They make these choices about who sees what when. Not any of us, not any of you. So learning, to have parents and teachers learn so that we know what our kids are seeing, we know what the disinformation is, we know what swatting is, we know these terms, that gives us a language. It's kind of like if you only speak English and you're in France and you don't understand French. We need to learn this language, and we need to actually be able to deal in the same language that the tech companies are doing. And the second piece, and that's part of the reason why they hate me so much and they hate all of us so much, is because we have to do the things that long-term hold them accountable, and that is what we're trying to do. Not just say a kid can turn on and off a control or a parent can turn on and off a control, but as our superintendent said, to actually make sure that we change the financial incentives in a way that is aligned with what our good doctor has said here as well, how to make sure that it is aligned to the health and well-being of our children as they grow up.
And agree, Randy. Oliver, last thoughts, and then we're going to transition to some table conversations.
So just a quick comment, Randy, thank you for doing the work you're doing. And right now, we're in the process, myself and some colleagues, are talking about how do we develop, for lack of a better word, a primer for parents to inform them of the language that you just mentioned. I know what my colleagues just went through in Bethlehem, and we put out comments about swatting, and people are like, what is swatting? And all of a sudden, we having debates about things, we're fighting each other about things that we don't have control of. And until we collectively, society, community, parents, understand the terminology that's being used, then we can quite frankly, defend it. Then we can have conversation with our kids. And so I'm sharing this out because I'm going to be talking to some of my colleagues about it to say, how do we start to get information that we put in the hands of parents so when you're having a conversation with your child, you are in fact smarter than the average fifth grader. And that's a big piece of it because right now we don't control the narrative and we're simply reacting to the narrative. And so I'm just saying, stay tuned. I think certainly NICET as an organization should be thinking about that. How do you put that in the hands of teachers so they understand what are the things that kids are talking about so you can, quite frankly, intervene or have those conversations or redirect it otherwise, right? So that's where it comes. That's where they have the control. They control the dialogue, and we're going to hit them in the pockets, hit them with legislation, and now we have to hit them with knowledge in terms of our ability to communicate accordingly.
I agree, Oliver, and I'll leave you with this last thought. If you look around this room, 2.6 million school children are relying on you. And I see Michael Mulgrew, my colleague from New York City, his 1 million children are relying on us. And our 1.6 million children from around the rest of the state are relying on us. And each and every child in this state has a dream, and their parents and caregivers have a dream for them. And 60% of them are in some level of food insecurity, and 200,000 of them are homeless, and 23% of them have a disability. They are relying on us. So when this work gets hard, and it does every day, and when it gets challenging, and it does every day, you remember those 2.6 million beautiful faces, because they're relying on us to be dream makers. They're relying on our educators and our parent-teacher associations and organizations and our classroom teachers and our mental health professionals and our community members and our first responders and all of the partners that make a school building a community, and that's what we are. So please don't ever give up. Thank you for what you do. I am making an executive decision from the podium as a former NICET employee right now on timing. So Lonnie said I could do this. So we are going to have some facilitated table conversations on this conversation. Melinda will go till 11:05. Does that work? So we're going to have conversations at our table, some facilitated table conversations until 11:05. Then we're going to start our next panel. Thank you to this. Let's give a round of applause to these fantastic panelists today.